So a warm welcome again to everyone, everybody seated in the room and our colleagues that are joining us online. I'm very happy that you are joining us for this session. On behalf of International Budget Partnership, I want to welcome us to this session entitled Transparency is Not Enough, Empowering Domestic Accountability Around Public Debt. This session is co-hosted by our colleagues from the NDI, LatinDad, as well as Bajeti Hub from Kenya. So the session, first of all, just to announce both to our colleagues online that we have translation available in English, French, and Spanish. And you can connect to the Zoom link via this. There's a QR code here. If you want to connect to the online translation services, please, you can scan the code over there. So this event is going to be focused on the issue of public debt, transparency and accountability, strengthening domestic accountability around public debt, government decisions around borrowing, as well as public debt management has significant impact on public services, on the vulnerable, and in the broader economic stability. And that is why it's very key for us to focus on this topic. But to help us to set the ball rolling and to give us a sneak peek of why this topic is really critical at this point in time, and also put it in the context of IBP's broader programming, I want to welcome the Executive Director of IBP, Ana Patricia Munoz, to give us her opening remarks. We can welcome her with a round of applause.
From here?
Yeah, from there.
There, I can hear. Great. It's great to see you. I guess in this room, I don't need to make the case of why this is important and why around the world, especially marginalized communities, are suffering the impact of the debt crisis. And just a heads up, we are not here today to solve the issue of whether this is a solvency or a liquidity problem. That's going to be other forums about that. Regardless of what kind of problem, the truth is that about 40% of the population worldwide live in countries where governments spend more on debt servicing than on social sectors. That is just the reality. And the organizations we are working with now today and others during the annual meetings, but also throughout the years, are doing very important work in rethinking the financial architecture. How do we reform it? They're thinking about debt relief and debt restructuring. This conversation is not about that either. That is very important. But maybe a theme that is less talked about is how do we ensure that domestic debt accountability exists? How do we think about preventing that these crises happen again and again? At the International Budget Partnership, we work with partners around the world in 125 countries to make sure that governments raise and spend public resources in a way that is equitable and that is transparent. We have been working over 125, not yet, over 25 years in building really a field, a movement of civil society organizations throughout the world that look at the budget, work on budget issues, influence it, and more we're trying to make sure that that is connected to people's lives. And so if you think about it, the budget is a reflection of a country's priorities. Unfortunately, though, as we're going to hear today and as our research has shown, the debt management process sometimes goes in parallel with the budget processes. As much progress as we have made on making sure that the budget cycle is more transparent and inclusive, more needs to be done. We are miles away. There's still a long way to go on the debt side. And that's why we are here today. Actually, the Open Budget Survey that we released at the end of May, that was implemented in 125 countries, that measures, as many of you know, 3 pillars on transparency, participation, and accountability, shows that only half of the countries that were surveyed show what's the debt burden in their budgets. Only half of them do. This very simple indicator. And less than a quarter provide information on how sustainable that is over time. And so we are this morning here, and again, thanking very much NDI, Budgeti, and Latindad for joining us in hosting this conversation about how we bring together actors that can hold governments accountable. Not because it's the right thing to do, but because that can help avoid future crises on the kind of debt that is acquired, on the uses of that debt, making sure that that's used for achieving true development goals. But who are we talking about? Civil society, of course. And not only technical groups, also make sure that groups that have been marginalized are part of the conversation. It includes accountability actors like parliaments and also auditors. We have been working with partners, with DFI, on scoping out what this means, and we have not found a single example where all of this has come together. We have case studies where we see one thing or the other, but this is what we're going to hear about today, how we can make this happen. So hopefully this is just the beginning of a conversation that we're going to continue to have over time. So I thank you for being here, and of course a big thank to the organizations that are working with us today. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Ana Patricia. Like she rightly says, so for the focus of this session is for us to move beyond the issue of debt transparency, because clearly it's not enough. And think about how do we build domestic accountability, strengthening domestic actors like the legislature, the civil society organizations, as well as other actors that play a key role domestically. I have a rich panel with me today. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Austin Ndiokolo, the Director of Policy and Global Advocacy. I'm honored to be moderating this session. In terms of my background, I'm a public policy expert. I've been in this sector for the past 20 years, both from the civil society angle and from providing direct technical assistance support to government institutions and actors at both the national level in Nigeria and also at the global level. I have a very rich panel with me today. I've got 2 speakers online, and 2 are here with us present. And I want to start with our speakers online to formally introduce them. First of all, I don't know if Patricia is online with us. Okay. All right, so Patricia Miranda is the Global Advocacy Director and Coordinator of the new financial architecture area within Latindad. And Patricia has extensive expertise in debt, financing, international financial institutions, and financial architecture, with experience spanning the public sector and civil society organizations at local, national, regional, and global levels. She previously served as program officer for HIPIC countries in Latin America at the Center for Latin American Monetary Studies. Patricia, you're welcome. You can say hello so that we're sure you can hear us.
Thank you, Austin, and very glad to be here. Greetings to everyone.
Okay, thank you so much. And also joining us online is I have the honor and privilege to introduce Honorable Gladys Ganda. She is a member of parliament for Nsanje Lalanje in Malawi, elected in May 2019. Hopefully she's here. Yeah, she's joined us. Gladys currently chairs the Budget Committee, providing oversight of government public financial management. Her expertise in finance and taxation is bolstered by over 2 decades of experience, including her tenure as Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the National Oil Company and the National Bank of Malawi. Gladys, we are so honored that you could join us.
for the invitation. I hope you can hear me.
We're getting an echo. Just to be sure that nobody has got their mics on. Yeah. Okay, please. Okay. All right. Okay. I think the IT section can sort that out. Okay. All right. Just to our colleagues here seated with us. I think there's a problem. Is anybody connected online? Okay, Gladys, can you go on mute? Okay. Thank you so much. So seated here with me, first of all, I have Carla Vasquez Suarez. Carla works currently as a senior counsel in IMF's legal department, where she has worked since 2018. It's actually 2015, sorry about that. She provides legal advice on public financial management and central banking across various regions, including Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. With expertise in public debt management, fiscal reporting, and fiscal risk management, Ms. Vasquez has advised on legal reforms in numerous countries. Prior to joining the IMF, she worked in corporate and banking law in Bolivia. Carla, welcome to this panel.
Thank you very much, Austin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And last, certainly not the least, my brother and colleague, he's Dr. Abraham Rugo Murui. He's currently the Executive Director of Bajeti Hub from Kenya. Dr. Rugo is the Executive Director of Bajeti Hub and has over 19 years of experience in decentralization, participatory governance, and public finance management. He's passionate about advancing local development, supporting citizen engagement, and improving government service delivery through research, policy analysis, and capacity development. Dr. Rugo is also a co-convener of the Okoa Uchumi campaign, which advocates for public debt transparency and accountability in Kenya. That coalition is very, very active at these annual meetings, and I've seen them in action. Abraham, you're welcome to the panel.
Thank you very much, and a pleasure.
Okay. So we'll have 2 rounds of questions for the panelists. We'll start with the first round, and then we'll have an icebreaker where we'll do a Menti. My colleagues from IBP are here with me. Suad, Claire are here. So we will be asking some questions just to get your participation around your thoughts around public debt accountability. And then we'll come back to the second round of questions, and then we'll open up for questions and answer. So very quickly to the question, I want to start with Abraham. And it's almost like a criminal offense these days to talk about public accountability around debt without mentioning Kenya. And once you make the statement, public debt transparency is not enough, Kenya also comes to mind. Because a lot of assessments have placed Kenya as performing above average around making available key debt documents, medium-term debt strategy, debt sustainability analysis, the annual borrowing plan. Okay, so how did Kenya get to this position, despite all of this?
Thank you very much, and I want to bring many great regards from the people of Kenya and from the Okoa Uchumi. Okoa Uchumi is Save the Economy in Swahili, and Bajeti is budgets in Swahili. So a lot of Swahili words there. And we, as Austin has mentioned, Kenya did not just wake up one morning and find itself in the current situation we have, but it's been a multiplicity of issues. One is borrowing as a fix the gap kind of measure. So where basically you work out your expenditure, work out your revenue, targets, with the expectation that the deficit will definitely be sorted out by borrowing. And therefore that pushed to lots of overborrowing, a mix of overborrowing from commercial borrowing, through the Eurobonds especially, to a lot of bilaterals, especially both from the traditional lenders, the Bretton Woods institutions and countries in the West, but increasingly from China and now from the United Arab Emirates. And then domestic borrowing, which sometimes is not spoken about, but our current domestic borrowing is actually at the range of 16 to 18% in the last 2 years. Now, but the bigger question has not been so much, we have these high levels of borrowing, but then it's about how those, by law, all borrowing is supposed to be for capital expenditure. Basically, it's supposed to meet that gap and not for paying salaries. But a lot of the borrowing now has been on recurrent. As a matter of fact, the last Eurobond, the 8th Eurobond Kenya took, was to pay the first Eurobond. And it was taken at 4% higher, interest rate than the previous one. And therefore, the question has been, where has this money been going? Are we spending it for the rightful? And that's a big question, actually, that informed even the protests. We can't seem to see where, the billions of dollars, and in Kenya shillings, it's in trillions, almost 10 trillion, has gone. In healthcare, where have we spent it? In education. And the reason why we actually had to borrow a Eurobond to pay the previous Eurobond is because we didn't put it into the right purposes. And so when I say we, I'm actually taking, the collective responsibility of the Kenya government and the Kenya as a country. And therefore, the accountability question around where the money has been going is a key central place. But the second piece is that we have a great, and as Austin has mentioned, we actually perhaps have one of the most progressive, by constitution provision, institutions that are supposed to be putting checks and balances. Let me just give you an example. You have a parliament that, of course, has the power of the purse, where you have a budget committee, you have a finance committee, you have now a privatization and public debt committee, and you have the institutions there. Then you have the Office of the Auditor General that basically comes to do the audit. But in between, you have the Office of the Controller of Budget, which basically authorizes all expenditure. And then you have you have institutions within the Council of Governors, and you have the Public Debt Management Office. Of course, you still have the National Treasury. And the question is, why have all these institutions, and yet you're still not achieving accountability? And to be precise, is that then the question of Parliament came in very, very strongly. Is Parliament as an oversight institution providing the necessary support? And that's why, for instance, the protests actually targeted Parliament. The issue was that citizens provide we also have a fairly progressive public participation framework, but the question is, we provide all these memorandums, we provide all this input, we raise all these questions around how debt has been going, but we are not getting responses. And therefore, so the crisis you saw basically was a culmination of frustration that the institutions exist but are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. We are not getting accountability in terms of how these resources have been spent. And but perhaps the final nail on the coffin was that this is being framed as a revenue problem. That all that we need as a government is more money. Give us more money, all will be well, and therefore the taxation measures for 2024, 2025, we're going to raise in Kenya shillings about 346 billion. That should be about perhaps losing billions in terms of US dollar. But 346 billion is not a small amount. We're going to raise our by about 10% in terms of our revenue in the coming year. And the question is, but what have you done with the money that has been collected over the years? Why is it that you're not addressing expenditure questions? And therefore, and my last point, is that then this culminated that this is no longer a technical numbers problem, but this is a governance problem. You are dealing with pilferation of public funds, because if you cannot see them in services, yet the money has been borrowed and we are paying it, then there is a problem in between there. Then it became also, so as a governance problem, therefore, then you are starting to deal with, are institutions doing what they are supposed to be doing? Which the answer was they are not doing what they are doing. Other reforms that have been agreed on, including with the International Monetary Fund where we are they being followed, or are we just using promissory notes? With every review, there's a new promissory note of we will do those things, and therefore they get more money and more money and more money. And therefore throwing basically good money after bad money basically precipitates the crisis. So we are dealing with a governance challenge, and that's why, right now if you go to the Treasury website of Kenya, you will find all the numbers you can find. But is there accountability for that? And therefore, that governance crisis of institutions, perhaps not perhaps, but basically institutions not doing their work, is basically what got us to where we are in Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abraham. So just listening to you, the legal institutional frameworks are in place, but there are gaps, especially, and I think you intentionally mentioned gaps with the legislative oversight, despite the fact that the informations are usually placed before the Parliament, both from the government side and from the civil society aspect. And that takes me to Honorable Gladys. Malawi recently devalued her currency and currently facing immense pressure from rising inflation and high debt servicing costs. What, in your own estimation, are the challenges the Parliament, and you're a member of the Parliament in Malawi, is facing in actually ensuring that government maintains the highest level of transparency and accountability around it?
Thank you so much, moderator.
Thank you so much, moderator. Thank you so much, moderator. Thank you so much, moderator. Thank you so much, moderator.
Yeah, Gladys, are you logged into two different devices at the same time? Maybe on your phone and your laptop? Maybe you have to put one on mute, I guess.
Can you hear me now properly?
Yeah, much better. Thank you. I wish we can solve the debt problem this easily.
Thank you so much, moderator, for yielding the floor to me. Indeed, following November 2023 evaluation of local currency, we have issues with foreign debt stock and also servicing charges. They almost doubled. And the devaluation itself came in the mix of the central bank, that's the Reserve Bank of Malawi, raising the policy rates from 18% to 26%. Within a period of about 18 months. And the main reason was to curb inflation, but it has not yielded positive results as inflation continues to rise. And government has even suffered the most because of cost escalations of some projects that the government is implementing. And even the central bank itself had also huge losses that required treasury bailout. And further to that, we've also seen that the government is issuing securities at a higher interest cost to roll over maturing securities that were originally issued at a lower cost. So in all this, Parliament has got a big challenge as to play its oversight role, and especially the Budget and Finance Committee of Parliament. In Malawi Parliament, one of the challenges that we have is that, yes, we have our own standing orders, which does stipulate that each and every loan authorization bill has to be brought to Parliament, especially to Budget and Finance Committee for scrutiny. So it's in black and white, and actually there's a standing order that points to that. The Public Finance Management Act is not very clear, but it just says that Budget and Finance Committee has got a role in terms of making sure that it reviews the bills, the financial bills themselves, the money bills themselves. But the Open Government Partnership that the Parliament of Malawi did sign with the executive clearly stipulates that each and every money bill should be referred to the Budget and Finance Committee for scrutiny before it's fully discussed in Parliament and approved. We are almost 2 years down the line, and I can tell you that there are only two bills that were referred to the committee. So there are the laws are there, or some apart from the laws, also some agreements, gentlemen agreements. But you see that we tend to do some shortcuts, not knowing that the shortcuts that we are doing, they're not for the benefit of Malawians, because we are failing as a committee to scrutinize the bills critically. So that's one of the challenges that we are facing. We are rushing our financial bills. We're not giving Budget and Finance Committee time to scrutinize the bills properly, and yet the commitment requires that we do that. At the end of the day, we are giving Malawians a raw deal, in fact. And besides that, when we're approving our budget, we give government a blanket approval, a deficit budget, because our resources are not enough to cater for all the needs that we are supposed to, or the other sectors that we are supposed to budget for. So when approving a budget, we approve a budget with a deficit. So we give a Minister of Finance a blank check to say here's a blank check, write an amount that we would like to write, but as long as it's within this limit. But what happens is, for the foreign loans, yes, we have all that. At least they come into Parliament. At least the results may not be, as rose as we may wish, but at least they come into Parliament. But for the domestic debt, that's where the other challenge is. For the domestic debt, those domestic debts do not come into Parliament. They are not approved by Parliament. They are just assumed. It's just assumed that the minister approves the amounts within the initial limit that we approved in Parliament. So that's another challenge that we also face. Another issue that is also expanding our debt is the issue to do with promissory notes. Government is issuing promissory notes to suppliers and promise them to pay at a certain time. If government has no money at that time, government is compelled to borrow. And the promissory notes, guarantees are being issued left and right, but those guarantees are not approved by Parliament. And in view of the current situation of economic situation of the country, I expected that the guarantees also should be approved by Parliament. But government is not mandated by any law to bring guarantees to Parliament for approval. The law stipulates that government should just bring the law, the guarantees for nothing. So they issue guarantees elsewhere. Somebody fails to perform a performance guarantee, then government has to pay. That's a debt. So performance guarantees are supposed to be treated as debts because there's a high risk of default. Anyway, most of them default anyway. So we have promissory notes, we have guarantees that are not approved by Parliament, but Minister of Finance can issue the notes, Minister of Finance can issue the guarantees, and whenever a guarantee is called upon, the guarantor has to pay. So we have all these issues that we need to look into. And again, there's also an increase in issuance of infrastructure bonds. We've noted that there are some infrastructure bonds that the government has issued, and those bonds were not approved by Parliament at all. That's another issue that is there. So yes, we've come a long way, I must say, because initially Parliament was not very involved in the debt management issues in the whole process. I remember in 2022, we had to change our Public Finance Management Act to make sure that the Budget and Finance Committee roles and responsibilities are clear in that Public Finance Management Act. We had to also amend our standing orders, and we have also moved. I think we are the only SADC country that has signed an open government partnership with the executive. But what it requires now is, one, to make sure that we implement that, and also to probably look at post-legislation scrutiny, scrutinize our Public Finance Management Act, and make sure that it's in black and white. It's clear what the role of Parliament in all this, as opposed to just this other gentleman's agreement, because it's in some cases it's not working. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Honorable Gladys. If you can go on mute, that would be helpful. I mean, just listening to you, it brings to the fore a conversation we're having recently. Somebody was saying in a convening like this that whether it's about tax, whether it's about debt, the public bear the burden. So tax is money that the public pay today, debt is money that they pay tomorrow. So listening to Honorable Gladys, it's clear the government has been incurring contingent liabilities without the required legislative oversight because of gaps in the law, and she talks about cutting corners, gentleman's agreement, whatever that means. So So not having that diligent assessment of the longer term sustainability risk assessments remains a problem that Malawi continues to face. And we can move from Africa to Latin America and see whether the picture is different. I want to bring in Patricia right now. So currently, Patricia, many Latin American countries seem to be facing a lot of pressures, a lot of debt pressure due to global shocks, not just the pandemic, but also rising global interest rates and so on and so forth, and rising inflation. What, in your own estimation, is responsible for this? And what do you think are the international financial architectural issues that are actually exacerbating this issue and driving more and more countries into debt crisis, especially in your region?
Thank you, Austin. Indeed, there has been an increasing trend of debt in Latin America, of public debt. Some countries in our region are close to a debt crisis, but in general, all countries in the region are carrying a high debt burden of debt that has been recently started to be measured, and it has been mentioned in the beginning. It's about the debt service payments, and we're talking about both external and domestic debt. So I just also want to say that I fully agree with what Austin and Gladys mentioned about domestic debt challenges and how this needs to be part of the whole assessment, analysis, and so on of the public debt, not only external, which has been at least for Latin America, it has been the main issue to address, to look at since the last debt crisis in the 80s, only external debt. But we need also to look at the domestic debt. In the case of Latin America, the debt service payments are consuming on average 35% of the budget revenues. And here I want to say also that sometimes it's easier to look at the debt situation of low-income countries. In the case of Latin America, almost all countries of our region are classified as middle-income countries. Even Haiti is classified as a middle-income country. So the debt challenges need also to address the problems that middle-income countries are going through in this context. This situation is, of course, displacing spending in critical areas such as education, health, and social protection. If we talk about in a sectoral level, in our region, the debt service payments for this year will be about more than 200% of education spending, if we compare both, or more than 260% if we compare debt service with health, and almost the same amount if we compare it with social protection spending. So if we think about these figures, it's of course more critical for our population in a context of multiple crises that we are living, especially after the pandemic. Now, whether the data is there, and it's not for a long time, I would say it's just in the recent years that we have access to this kind of data, and we have access in part because of there are organizations that are working on this specific data, as the Debt Service Watch, for instance. But the data is there, but the population is not really aware of it. It's not well known to what extent a country is prioritizing a high debt service payment, regardless the key needs in terms of health, education, social protection. In our case, it's because not only the debt stock has increased, and especially after the pandemic, but it's also about the cost of borrowing, which we can say that on average for Latin America is 7.7%, But in some countries, it's really high, as in some countries can reach even to 25%, while if we compare this with the interest rates of that the United States have access to, which is 2.5%, or other countries in the European Union that have even less, a less percentage in terms of interest rates. So you asked also about how this is related with the debt architecture reform, and from civil society organizations in Latin America, but also with partners in the Global South, we are raising this alarm, and I think we need to raise it louder, that we are in a critical debt situation, and it's not only a liquidity issue. If we talk about these ratios, it is also about the ability of our countries to meet our financial obligations, but also as a warning of a widespread solvency problem in the medium term if immediate action is not taken. So we know that we have a really limited fiscal space in our countries. That makes it impossible in the current context to fulfill these obligations and at the same time to provide basic public services and uphold people's rights. So what CSOs are calling for is to have a reform of the current debt architecture. And this implies the different needs that countries have. Not all countries have the same needs, but some countries need an urgent and immediate debt relief. Other countries need to go through a process of debt restructuring, but under a transparent, timely, and independent approach, which currently there isn't a system like that in place. Countries also need access to concessional financing, in particular middle-income countries, but in general, the Global South, with reduced interest rates. And here, the role of credit rating agencies is key, because in most cases, or in all cases, the high interest rates are related with the assessment of a credit rating agency to a certain country's situation. So in summary, what we are calling for is for a reform, but in a more democratic space. So a United Nations Debt Convention framework, which includes all the issues that I just mentioned, where all countries are at the same table discussing about global debt rules. We think that would be more fair, but also that would entail policies that have an impact in the medium and long term, to address every part of this puzzle, which is the debt architecture, with national legislations, including also responsible borrowing and lending. And this also entails binding rules that addresses transparency, but from both sides, transparency from the borrowers and from the lender sides. I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Listening to you, urgent reforms are required. Different countries are in different places, but across all of the countries, one common denominator is the fact that debt servicing payments are crowding out government spending in critical social development sectors, health, education, and social protection. And one wonders the effect that is happening on the recovery from the pandemic. So thanks for that. A lot of issues to look at, and that brings me to Carla. From the perspective of the IMF, the IMF has recently published a lot of articles, relating to how public debt transparency and accountability can be better improved. Based on your analysis, because you co-authored at least two of those pieces of work that I've seen, so based on your own analysis, what are the main challenges that are undermining domestic accountability for debt across the countries that you've worked on?
Thank you, Austin, and thank you, IBP, for organizing this event, and also NDI and Budgeti Hub and Latin Data for co-organizing this. For the IMF, empowering domestic oversight of public debt is essential, of course, to ensure economic growth, as we have seen and talk about in different interventions, and especially with the high levels of debt that we will discuss all this week, especially in low-income countries and emerging economies. So the fund publications that you mentioned, Austin, first the board paper called Making Public Debt Public, and the working paper of the legal department, which is Legal Foundations for Debt Transparency, which, by the way, will be soon available in several languages. While it focused on the discussion on debt transparency per se, it went to a great length to discuss the specific governance and institutional weaknesses that hamper proper accountability. So today I will want to discuss these findings, and let me focus to answer to your question to three key messages. And many will resonate to what we have been discussing with other panelists. So first is that debt vulnerabilities are increasingly complex. No? Low-income countries and emerging markets, in the first place, are facing a changing creditor landscape. Abraham mentioned, we have official bilateral creditors in the place. We have a wide range of commercial creditors. A second aspect is that we see a migration to off-balance sheet liabilities. No? We're no longer talking about central government debt. We are seeing that governments are channeling financing through off-budget entities, such as extra budgetary funds, such as special purpose vehicles, even as state-owned enterprises. The magnitude of these type of financing can be very similar to central government. A third point is that we also see large fiscal risk, including contingent liabilities, increasing. No? We see that in PPPs, we see that in government guarantees, as Gladys was mentioning, and also subnational debt and other type of risk. When these type of risks are not in check, they materialize and they become liabilities. And finally, we see an increasing use of collateralized debt, or debt with collateral-like features, So the problem is that the complexity of these transactions and the asymmetry in the capacity between the borrower and the lender usually increases the risk for onerous terms and conditions. Now, if you think about it, all these elements are adding significant challenges to normal accountability frameworks that are usually in place in countries. A second key message that I want to discuss today with you is that we have also complex underlying drivers and adverse incentives, and that has been discussed a lot in the board paper. No? Those are playing behind debt mismanagement, and they are playing behind debt opacity. So let me give you a few examples. Many countries have inadequate institutions, but also inadequate institutional arrangements. So if you think about it, debt management in low-income countries and emerging markets most of the time are typically held responsible only for managing a part of the total public debt. No? So the responsibilities are spread across different agencies and spread across even line ministries. This may limit accountability, especially if we don't have effective coordination mechanisms in place. And what happens that the ability to see the overall public debt is decreased, and the information flow also is inhibited. Therefore, the public doesn't have access to timely updates on debt information. Countries also have significant capacity constraints, and we're very clear on that in our assessment. They have scant resources, but also weak information systems that can allow proper monitoring of the debt. Adverse incentives also play out, and this is political economy. No? Governments may have an incentive to not be fully transparent, for example, to divert public funds, and we have been discussing that with other panelists. either for private gain or as simply as to circumvent fiscal rules or any other rule that we have in place in the country. On the creditor side, there can be also incentives. No, lack of transparency may get them to negotiate better terms and conditions in some of the loans. No, especially with the borrowers that have fewer financing options, which are low-income countries with high distress of debt. Finally, we see a proliferation of broad confidentiality agreements in debt contracts, especially for the non-marketable debt, and this hampers accountability. No? When policymakers have the discretion to classify debt contracts as confidential, be it as national security reasons or any other reasons, then the question of the validity of debt sometimes comes into place, no? And this reduces, of course, transparency, but more importantly, public scrutiny on this type of transactions. Now, finally, let me turn to the third key message that I want to discuss in this first intervention. And I want to talk about the importance of laws, as other fellow panelists have done. A little self-promotion here. Sorry for that, I'm a lawyer. But the publication that we mentioned look over 60 jurisdictions and domestic legal frameworks. Although there are some advances over the last few years, it's still lagging behind from international standards and good practices of public debt management. So I will focus on four. And I picked these because of some of the interventions of Gladys, Abraham, and Patricia. One, there is no standard definition of public debt. Who can borrow? Definitions in the laws are often limited to central government borrow, right? And we discussed that entities outside the central government borrowing are now increasing, becoming a problem. Also, public debt only relates to loan and securities, not to other type of more complex debt instruments. No, so this is allowing certain forms of sovereign debt to escape from public oversight or to have loose requirements for authorization. Second, on the point that Gladys was making on borrowing authorization frameworks, we still see a lot of vagueness in the laws. Who can borrow? What are the limits and restrictions? Are there differentiated process for authorizing public debt? Who authorizes collateral on public debt? Can future revenues for example, oil sales be actually pledged in debt contracts? Weaknesses in all these frameworks really put or increase the risk on overborrowing, especially on entities outside the Minister of Finance purview. On the issue on government guarantees, and we cannot agree more on that point, laws are very vague or not clear about who authorizes government guarantees, and we're even talking about explicit government guarantees. What are the purposes or conditions for granting a guarantee? What are the obligations of the lenders and the borrowers? Are we putting risk mitigation tools for the credit assessment before we grant a guarantee? Are we requiring a fee, for example, to be charged when we issue a guarantee? Are we granting full guarantees or partial guarantees to get the creditors with some skin in the game? No? And do we have sanctions for non-compliance? And what is the disclosure look like on the guarantees and the beneficiaries? Finally, I think another weakness that we see in the laws is across the globe, legal requirements for debt transparency or debt disclosure are inadequate. And I know that this is not about transparency, and transparency is not enough, but it is an important enabler to accountability, and I think it's important to talk about that. So about laws, what we see in across our survey is that 50% of the countries surveyed do not require a publication of debt management reports or any kind of fiscal reports. Less than 25% of those countries require loan-level information, which is kind of the essential one for a more public scrutiny on the borrower decisions that we were discussing. So this means that there are no requirements on what should be reported and who should report. No? In such scenarios, of course, accountability mechanisms cannot enforce compliance. So why are laws important for accountability? Well, much can be done at secondary legislation, and we admit that there's more flexibility. But we believe that primary laws do give some sense, a high sense of permanency. Also, it bounds the discretion of policymakers and their managers on when and how to contract debt, and of course enables other important accountability mechanisms such as the legislature and the supreme audit institutions in exercise their duties and responsibilities. But let me stop there, and I know we'll talk about them in the second round of comments.
Thank you so much, Carla. Yes, I would deliberately allow for this first round of questioning, allow all the speakers to take time to make their cases. When we get to the second round, we'll be much more succinct so that we can allow time for questions and answers. I just wanted to repeat that we do have an overflow room where we can sit comfortably and still participate actively and still watch, if that is fine. But then if people can also continue to stand if they feel like they prefer to stay here. I just thought to mention that. So the summary of all that Carla just talked about is that there seem to be incentives for both governments as well as creditors not to be transparent, and that more and more we are seeing more complexity as well as more diversity in public debt and borrowing, what we find in that sector. So that complexity is actually making it difficult for one to independently see the complete picture of government's complete debt stock at any point in time. So that's one key problem. I did talk about the Mentimeter. We want to get your feedback. Okay, so it's already on Zoom. So people on Zoom, you can click on a link there or scan the QR code or go to www.menti.com. There's going to be a number that is provided there. I thought it was going to come up here so that we can also have the audience.
We can share the number maybe?
Okay, please just go to menti.com. If you get in there, okay, that is up there on the screen. So if we can do that quickly, that's the code, the number there, 331777232. Just go to menti.com. I know some of us might be able to even scan this from where we are seated. So if you can do that, that's fine. And then we're going to see a set of questions and some options. We want.
The presentation is closed.
Closed?
It says the voting access is closed.
Okay, I think it's been refreshed. Presentation is closed. Why?
Missing the code.
Okay, who knows how to solve this?
You just go to menti.com and then enter the code.
It still doesn't work, right?
No.
Okay, now it's working, right? Okay, great. It's not working. Okay. Do we have the options there? And it would be good to see where we are leaning. So it's about. So the question is, What do you believe is the most significant challenge to ensuring public accountability in government borrowing? So the first option there is lack of transparency. The second one is around insufficient capacity within oversight institutions. Then we have weak enforcement of debt management laws, like been emphasized here. Limited public participation is the fourth option. And then finally, external pressures from international lenders. So where do you think the ball lies? Okay, so, it's changing fast. We're seeing more around weak enforcement of laws. Limited public participation is getting a look in, but then insufficient oversight capacity seems to be prominent too. Looks like public participation is dropping. I hope I hope people are not changing their votes. Okay, so I mean, the picture actually is a fair reflection of the conversation we've had so far. So we'll leave this open. We'll also provide you an opportunity to also to harvest your questions from.
Lack of transparency equals corruption, or where does corruption fit into this option?
Yeah, it fits under lack of transparency. I think it's cross-cutting across.
This is also going to be informed by your own specific circumstances.
Exactly, this particular context.
So you may have strong laws, but terrible.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So thank you so much. So we want to quickly move on to the next round, and I'm going to be giving 2 minutes each for the speakers to just make their input. So for this second round, we're going to be focusing on what do we need to do to address the challenges that are being raised, and I'm going to go in reverse order, starting with Carla. So are there specific steps that are currently being taken by the fund to actually push governments to be more transparent in their debt management practices? If you can just quickly just highlight them, we can maybe during the question and answers we can dive deeper if need be.
Thank you. Well, the IMF promotes public debt transparency and accountability throughout many of the activities that are very familiar to most of you. This includes setting international standards and guidelines on public debt management and disclosure and public financial management more broadly. No? So we're talking about the IMF and World Bank public debt management guidelines, the Fiscal Transparency Code, the public sector data statistics, and of course the data dissemination standards. Second, we also conduct regular assessment of countries against these standards to identify the problems, and we provide technical assistance to our member countries to try to help them improve their current practices. Also, we conduct governance assessments in countries, and here I think it's worth the remark that the IMF is not only focused on corruption itself, but also in the key vulnerabilities associated with corruption risks. So those are related to fiscal governance risks, central banks, and also financial sector. And debt, of course, cuts across all of these areas. And with respect to IMF lending, of course, the use of conditionality could also be assessed on a case-by-case basis in line with the conditionality guidelines. And countries may be asked to commit to specific actions to improve the public debt management practices and increase transparency and accountability. Finally, let me say that the IMF works throughout the capacity development areas, which includes technical assistance and training on legal reform to support the role of the legislature to oversight public debt, and also supreme audit institutions to support the oversight of public debt. And the legal department has a capacity development project since 2021 on SAIs that while focused on emergency spending during the pandemic, also covers issues like independence of SAIs and also the broader accountability framework with liaisons with law enforcement agencies, civil society, and parliament. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with one eye on the clock, we're just going to run through this second round, and then we can do whatever summaries at the end of the day. So let me bring on Patricia. So from your first intervention and from listening to Carla, there are, incentives for lenders and creditors not to be transparent. Do you think realistically we can expect lenders to play any role in improving debt transparency and accountability? And what should civil society be doing, in terms of encouraging improvements in lending practices?
Thanks.
If you can do that in 2 minutes, Patricia, that would be very good.
I will try. I think lenders have a very important role in terms of transparency. More transparency, but also with quality for all stakeholders at the local, national, and global levels. From the lender side, it's important to democratize the information on debt, because currently it's mainly for specialists, analysts, experts on debt, but or ministers of finance, but it's not for all people. And it's about making transparent the contracts, the conditions, also the conditionalities. You know that from civil society organizations, we criticize the approach on conditionalities that the IMF has. And not all people in the countries which are supposed to be the beneficiaries are aware of all these conditions and conditionalities that a country has to go through to get a loan. But also the assessment of impacts. What was the impact of this loan, of the IMF, or any other lender? This is not usually done, and if it is, it's not public for all the people. We also, as in our region, but also in other southern regions, a big and an important percentage, in our case, is almost 70% of the external debt is in the hands of bondholders. So it's also important to have a global debt registry. And why, for instance, even our own governments don't know who are the final holders of a certain bond. And if a country needs or wants to renegotiate their debt, they don't know who to renegotiate with. And this happened with Argentina, with Ecuador in our case. So it's also important at a global level to have an initiative like this. I would also like to mention, not only from a CSO perspective, that we need to have more access to this information, but also other stakeholders. As it has been mentioned, as parliamentarians, and in my past life, I was an advisor of parliamentarians, and I have the most bizarre stories of parliamentarians trying to understand and have access to debt, because finally, according to most of the country's constitution, parliamentarians approve loans. And if they don't understand, not all parliamentarians need to be debt experts, and not having access to information, to transparent information, it's also an important issue. Finally, I would like to also address the importance of promoting accountability and participation through participative processes. And I want to put an example in the case of debt sustainability analysis that are mostly run by the IMF. In some cases or in most cases are over-optimistic, and we have several examples on this. Because the projections and assumptions also, of course, are subject to some subjective criteria. And I have an example in the case of my country, Bolivia, where once there was an important initiative to have to run a debt sustainability analysis with the participation also of different stakeholders, civil society organizations, parliamentarians, even the private sector, the academia. So this can contribute to have a better result in terms of jointly assessing the assumptions, the projections, but also it contributes to make all stakeholders part of this process and at some point support its implementation. And I would like to briefly address to what Carla mentioned before about what is public debt. And it's not only a public loan with a bilateral or multilateral creditor. It includes also and all the risks for the central government in this case. If we talk about state-owned enterprises debt, subnational debt, warranties, special purpose vehicles that are used as in some processes, private debt that is publicly warranted. And as some of our faith-based members in Latin that say, it's like the Holy Spirit. We know it's there, but we cannot see it because there's no data. We need to make it more transparent. And if that data it's more transparent and it's part of the analysis, probably the results of the DSAs might be also even more realistic and decisions would be different. Probably the result would be, okay, this country is not really that sustainable as we were thinking, and we need to have different measures. So I think that is an important thing to add to address in terms of including more data and make it more transparent to include all these other risks that have. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. You still get an opportunity to intervene when questions come. But just listening to you, I recall one of the countries in your region. Of course, the official language is not English, but we discovered that all the debt-related reports were in English, meaning that they are not meant for local consumption. It's about upward transparency to creditors and lenders, and that is something we see across board. Just coming to Honorable Gladys. Just based on what you've shared with us about the challenges the Parliament is having, what tangible reforms do you think need to take place to strengthen legislative scrutiny of government borrowing and debt management and decisions? And are there partnerships that you think would really strengthen your ability to play your oversight role?
Thanks, moderator. As Budget and Finance Committee, we've been pushing, requesting for some reforms to be taken. After noticing that, yes, we have a good Public Finance Management Act, but after doing some post-legislation scrutiny, we've noted that there are still gaps that are here and there. So the first issue that we are still pushing, that will need, of course, some help, is to make sure that we have explicit approvals of key steps in the budget cycle. Because currently, there is no requirement in the Public Finance Management Act for Parliament to approve the economic and fiscal policy statement. So the absence itself, it does represent some weakness because the deficit becomes, like the de facto determined by cabinet approval. It's just the cabinet that approves that. So for Parliament not to approve the economic and fiscal policy statement, I think that's an area that has to be looked into. Similarly, the country has got a medium-term debt management strategy, and that is not even approved by Parliament as well. So that's another area that we also need to do that. Even the annual borrowing plan, it's not approved by Parliament. So we have to make sure that all these issues are included in the, we have explicit approvals in the key steps in the budget cycle. That's the first one. Now, from the loan authorization of foreign debt, as I said earlier on, we are seeing that there's a gap. I did mention a gentleman's agreement, and you said I don't know what she means. What I meant is we are signing commitments with open government partnership, but those are just commitments. Those are just soft agreements. We are supposed now to move forward and probably include those in our laws, because a commitment and a law are different. Because for a law, if you don't do according to the law, that's illegal. Commitment you can implement or not. It depends on how you feel about that commitment. So what we are seeing is that we don't have that issue of referring all loan bills to the Budget and Finance Committee in the Public Finance Management Act. That's why I said it's a gentleman's agreement, because it's not a law. It's just an agreement that is there, and one can choose to comply with that or not. So we thought that we can also include that in our Public Finance Management Act, act to make sure that we strengthen the legal framework. And the other issue is, I also mentioned, is about the domestic authorization of the domestic debt. We're going back to the same. There are three key instruments that are needed: the medium-term debt strategy, the annual borrowing plan, the economic and fiscal policy statement. All this, if these things are included in the approvals of the domestic debt, then it means Parliament will be more engaged, more involved in the process. But as we speak, we just receive. We don't even get reports. There's nothing that is happening on those issues. Further to that, there's also need to do capacitation programs, both members of Parliament and the Parliamentary Budget Office. We have a Parliamentary Budget Office that has some technocrats that do help the Budget and Finance Committee. But what I've noticed is, and you may agree with me, that parliamentarians are busy people. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we come from different backgrounds. We are not all finance experts, not accountants, not lawyers. No, we are coming from various disciplines. So there is need for capacitation. We don't just assume that when a member of Parliament is elected, it means they know everything. No, not at all. So they have to be brought into that and make them understand what all these issues are about. Because that capacitation of members of Parliament will improve the quality of engagement with the Ministry of Finance. And the training should just not be for the Budget and Finance Committee of Parliament. No, the training should be across Parliament. Because in Malawi setup, you have 21 members of Budget and Finance Committee. Of course, you present reports, but you also want to make sure that even your colleagues in other committees, you're somehow on the same page, so that when you talk about these simple issues, the Econs 101, Statistics 101, all that, they should be in a position to also understand what we're talking about. And there must be a toolkit for members of Parliament, so that they should be able to refer to that toolkit to say, okay, in terms of debt management, these are the issues that I need to look into. These are the critical areas that I need to focus on. Not just going through books and books. Go through all those books. They're too busy. So you just have to come up with a toolkit. A toolkit for that. So, enhancement technical expertise of members of Parliament, even the budget office. Like here in Malawi, we have a budget office that is very new. It's got young, vibrant people. But if you ask me truthfully, I'll tell you that in terms of level of know-how, technical expertise, sometimes I sit back and say, now, who is the expert? Is it myself or them? So you need to make sure that even the budget office is also trained. The young boys are very good, but they also have to be trained so that they give us some backing. Remember, politicians come and go. But if we are also going to train our budget office staff, those are the ones that will, when the new MPs come in, they'll be able to capacitate the other MPs as well. The other issue that I wanted to talk about is about public debt audits. There is need for the Budget and Finance Committees of Parliaments elsewhere to always do public debt audits. Then lastly, there's an issue of regular engagement with civil society and experts. What I've seen working for our Budget and Finance Committee here is we have that constant engagement with the civil society, where they do some research, they give us reports. Even when they notice something that is amiss, they come back to us and report and make us take up the issue in Parliament. That collaboration, that working together with the civil society, it does help. And most importantly, if Parliament is a political house, let's accept it, it's a political house. There are certain bills that are not money bills that are approved not for the betterment of the economy of the country, but for political reasons. If we involve the masses and they understand the implications that will bring when we approve that bill, they come to Parliament with placards, they demonstrate, they make noise, and we stop discussing the bills. So we must make sure that even the masses themselves are involved. They do understand the implications, the consequences of the huge debts that we have. They have to know that they will not be getting social services. They will not give the medicines in the hospitals will not be there. They'll not be getting some fertilizers, free fertilizers that they get at times. So there are so many things that affect them, but you need to make sure that you break down that information so that they should be able to understand it, involve them, and shows them that this is their money, this is taxpayers' money. So we have to be accountable for that. Therefore, put simply, from me, it's we have to do a post-legislation scrutiny. We have to do a gap analysis. Where is the problem? And address each and every problem. If we do a comprehensive gap analysis of this, we are going to come up with the results, or we are going to come up with interventions that will help the Malawi nation to manage its debt. Otherwise, we are in debt distress. For the past year, the debt has moved.
Thanks, Gladys. I love your passion, but I'll need to step into. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I have to apologize. We'll come back to you. I'll provide you another space to intervene, please. We just need to. I'm looking at the time. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Honorable Gladys. So we started with Kenya. We are ending with Kenya. Abraham, so people are interested in the Kenyan situation. So the civil society coalition, what next for you? What is the next line of action in terms of ensuring that whatever little gains you've got from the last engagement is sustained? Are you planning to bring people back on the streets, or there are more strategic interventions that you are looking at going forward?
Austin, it seems you want to suggest that I'm the one who brought them to the streets. I think every Kenyan was brought to the street by their own frustration and the reality of their lives. But let me say three things. The first, that even from where Honorable Gladys has stopped, it's apparent that our institutions of representation have failed and are failing. I don't think lives need to wait until those institutions are fixed. And therefore, a big part now will have to actually consolidate citizen agency. To consolidate citizen agency from a point of technical understanding to the extent that is practically possible, to consolidate citizen agency in a place where participation then becomes a mass, so that then the critical mass is not just a mass of people shouting, but actually there is some information, because that creates, politicians listen to votes, and votes are people. So if you have a greater political pressure, I think it's critical, but it's political pressure that is organized, that is structured, but most importantly, that is informed. That's critical. And in that, I think, and I want to say that for the Kenyans, I think it's really working on local action, but also globally connected. These issues don't just affect Kenya, as we are seeing. And therefore, there's that need for that global solidarity, global connection. The second point is that we cannot give up on working towards functional institutions, because these are the same institutions. Love them, hate them, Parliament still will have to approve the laws. Will have to be the one to provide. We cannot have, it will be anarchy if everybody has to provide accountability. That's why we have houses of representation. And therefore, that political pressure, stemming from point number one, for us in Kenya is something we are pushing, that institutions must work. And therefore the Office of the Auditor General, whatever reports they produce, first of all, they must produce the reports, including the debt audits that are required, and then that information must be followed through, because we think that's critical. Finally, is that there must be firm conditions, but these conditions must be public. And this is me addressing the international financial institutions. The conditions must be public. And the agreements have to be public, including Kenya has now asked for a governance diagnostic process from the IMF. We are pushing that process needs to be public. Whatever is being discussed, whatever findings are being made need to be public, because of point number one, that the public needs to know what is it that they are dealing with, so that they know where to put pressure, they know what to demand. Because often when these discussions are private, then it means there's nothing to ask. There are no questions to ask. So you have a big spreadsheet, but you don't know what is behind it. So those conditions need to be public, but secondly, they also must be followed through. So that if there is a condition, so for instance, for state reforms around, state-owned enterprises, which has been a big problem in Kenya and in many other countries, basically these quasi-government agencies that basically are sometimes the biggest, culprits in terms of, debt and debt default, actually, where the government, then the central government has to step in. Those conditions need to be followed through before the next disbursements, before the next programs, because particularly for the IMF and the World Bank, those are the institutions that basically are saying that these are the conditions you need to meet, and not all conditions, we agree, not all conditions are bad, and for those ones that are not bad need to be followed. The ones that are bad, by making them public, then there has to be a debate as to whether they are necessary, especially those, austerity measures that basically put the most vulnerable at greater risk of, of increased vulnerability. So for us, that's what we are going to be working on. And unless those things are addressed, I don't think they're going to be, calm. There's not going to be peace, because whereas we are here discussing, for many in our countries, is a matter of life and death. It's a matter of there are no drugs and essential supplies in hospitals. It's a matter of there are no books and teachers in schools. It's a matter of that there are no police services being provided in the places where they live. It's a matter of women who are dying because they cannot be provided for with reproductive services, or they cannot actually access a facility for safe delivery. So it boils down to realities, of people who cannot put food on the table, and people who actually are not able to educate their children, and therefore you are actually putting in danger an entire generation into the future. So the debt discussion ceases to be a matter of technical numbers, checklists, and what have you, but actually becomes a matter of life and death, and therefore the reason why we must act and act now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abraham. Thank you, everyone. I forgot to tell our colleagues online that you can put your questions in the chat, and our colleagues are going to do justice to that. So we want to move quickly to the question and answer. I'll start from the room. Aha. First come, first serve. I take a lady here on this angle, and the gentleman here. So quickly, just if you can summarize, just go straight to the point.
Yep.
Let's save time. Okay.
Very, very quick.
Tell us who you are and where you work.
Wonderful. My name is Dr. Angela Pashayan. I'm a professor at American University here in Washington, D.C., also part of a CSO that works in Kenya, YOD International, specifically in the slums, Mukuru. And so I'm loving everything that I'm hearing. I guess a couple of questions, and however you guys want to answer is fine. I'm the one person that chose the outlier in the Mentimeter, thinking that more pressure needs to be put on accountability from the lender side, because there's no reason for governments to make any changes if you keep getting money. So that's just a point that I wanted to make. The other one is thinking about what you were saying, Dr. Rugo, about public learning about these things. And I want to know what your thoughts are about pushing the information out through forms like WhatsApp or Rubin FM, in Mukuru, or Kibera, the radio station there, or working with large CSOs or NGOs in Kenya like Pamoja Trust, Akiba Trust, Muungano Alliance, those large institutions that can really help to inform the public.
Thank you so much. 30 seconds.
Just press the white one. The white.
Is it working? That white knob? Okay, just take the next one. Sorry.
This is a big circle right here.
Oh, the circle. Thank you. Quickly, my name is Julius Mukunda, and I work for the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group in Uganda. He's my neighbor. Something that attracted me most is what could be the definition of public debt? I think for me that's very intriguing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to give one additional slot. You had okay. So, okay. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Very short.
Put the mic.
Thank you. My name is Marcelo de Jesus. I belong to an Argentine NGO named Forest. The question is, how many loans have been denied by multilateral organizations due to lack of transparency or institutional vulnerabilities?
Thank you so much. So we will take two questions from online. Claire, if you can help us with that very quickly.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks for all the participation. We're combining the questions since we have a short time.
Okay.
But maybe the panelists could address one key way that we can bring these issues together, so to the community level, so informing people and getting their input into debt sustainability and the impact of debt.
Okay.
Over to you. Thanks so much.
That's a good consolidation of the questions we have online. So I'll hand it over to the panelists, and I'll give each panelist We have time, actually. So let's do 60 seconds, please. If you can just... Let's do 60 seconds. So who will go first? I'll just...
Well, okay, let me go first because my mic is on. 60 seconds is the longest time I've been given. Thank you, Dr. Angela. So the public information has to be simplified, and part of what we are doing is actually what you just said. The reason why public debt today in Kenya is actually in the mouth and in the almost every household, is a mix of different things. Community radios actually are more effective sometimes than even WhatsApp, because WhatsApp sometimes is just junk full. But yes, we are using WhatsApp, social media, a lot of TikTok, a lot of Instagram. A big part of the protests were organized on TikTok. So that's a space that we are. But we are also aware that regardless of how much you simplify this information, not everybody has the time. People don't wake up thinking about public debt. They wake up to look for food for their families. They wake up to take their children to school. They wake up to find their daily bread. And therefore, that's why we are working on getting, influence people, individuals who can be many organizations that do not necessarily even work in public finance to actually talk about these things in their different sectors, which connects to something I think Julius asked, how we can, what Claire has asked, how can we bring all this together? It has to be brought to the point of connection with the citizens. Citizens should, and what we are doing, maybe just say this, is to say that first of all, the discussion about how much is being allocated to public health, declining allocations, has a very direct connection with how much is being paid in public debt. So what we do is that we actually present the public debt numbers, public debt servicing, and Miranda has provided, and how much actually is happening in the social sectors. We publish that. That which now starts to bring a connection, the connection between how much you're being taxed and how much public debt is being paid. Because at that point, I can connect. But when you talk about debt to GDP ratio, revenue to whatever, nobody has time to think about those things. Very few of us, just poor souls like ourselves who do that things. But basically connect it to actual services and make the conversations micro at that level. It tricks the interest. Because all you want is, we are dealing with a governance problem, it has a political angle, and therefore you have to mobilize politically. And the only political connection is what matters to me. It boils down to what matters to me in that sense. I will not deal about what is public debt. It's a big discussion, so I'll pass to my next.
Yeah, Carla, if you can just give us your own definition and then just keep it at that. I'm afraid we'll run out of time and we need to vacate the room as quickly as possible. Is that possible? We can...
Before we get stuck out of the room, of course. Yeah, so the publication that I mentioned, the working paper of the legal department has an extensive discussion on the definition of public debt from the legal perspective. And of course, we try to be in line with the international standards. So we will want to get the economic nature of public debt and liabilities close to the legal definition. No? So we would be talking about debt securities, loans, insurance, pensions, standardized guarantee schemes, SDRs, currency and deposits, and others accounts payable. And in that accounts payable, arrears is one of the big ones. So putting the public definition in the law doesn't mean that you are giving the same authorization framework for all of that or the same institutional arrangements out of that. You're just promoting that public debt of all the entire public sector is taken into account. And the other axle, one is debt instruments, the other one is taking into account the institutional coverage that we talk about. Not only central government debt, but all other public institutions, of course, properly disaggregated and all of that, but should be considered public debt.
Okay, thanks everyone. And I think Abraham and Carla had done justice to responding to the questions. So we don't have enough time to get back to Honorable Gladys and Patricia. But just to put it all in context, I think throughout today's conversation, we've seen a strong alignment across institutions, governments, international players, civil society on the need to strengthen domestic debt accountability. But despite this alignment, we still think there's a big gap, and that gap has to do with our fragmented efforts, okay, because we are all working more in silos. We are not able to pool our resources together in the area of shifting government incentives to be more, and not just government but also lenders to be much more responsible and transparent with borrowing and debt management decisions. So to make real progress, we need to better connect our efforts. And I want to say on behalf of IBP that we are committed to play an active role in building those connections. So for you, those of you that are already doing some kind of work around debt accountability and debt transparency, please do get in touch with us. We encourage you to get in touch with us. Let's explore how we can collaborate more effectively to tackle these accountability challenges holistically. I want to thank everyone, all the participants, all our co-hosts, NDI Latindad and Bajeti Hub, and those online for your wonderful participation, and encourage continued dialogue on the issue of improving public debt management and accountability. So thank you all for your time.